No man will ever choose a girl that looks like this. Ada is not a woman, she is a punishment. If ugliness had a daughter, her name would be Ada.
I have met many beautiful women in my life, but none of them has a heart as beautiful as yours, Ada. Will you marry me?
Yes, Daniel.
They called her ugly every single day. Men rejected her. Women laughed at her. Even in her own father's house, she was treated like a servant. But everything changed the day the most handsome billionaire entered the village and chose the one nobody wanted. Every single morning, before the birds even opened their eyes, before the sky turned from black to grey, Ada was already on her feet. Her small hands wrapped around the heavy bucket, her bare feet touching the cold ground as she walked to the well. She did not complain. She never complained. But if you looked closely into her tired eyes, you would see a pain so deep that even silence could not hide it. Ada was 24 years old. She was not an old woman. She was not a sick woman. But if you saw her walking through the village every morning, you would think life had already finished with her. Her dress was faded and torn at the edges. Her hair was rough and uncombed. Her skin, which was naturally smooth, looked dry and worn from years of walking under the hot sun without rest. The other girls in the village always laughed when they saw her. They would whisper to each other, cover their mouths, and giggle as she passed. Some of the bold ones would say it out loud. Ada the ugly one. Nobody will ever marry that girl. She looks like she sleeps in the farm. And Ada would keep walking. Eyes forward. Head down. Heart quietly bleeding. But here is what those laughing girls did not know. They did not know that Ada had not always looked this way. When her mother was alive, Ada was a well-kept, bright-eyed little girl with a warm smile that could light up a room. Her mother, a gentlewoman named Mama Rosa, used to braid her hair with care every Sunday morning, singing softly as her fingers worked through each strand. She would rub shea butter on Ada's skin, dress her in clean clothes, and say, "My Ada, you are more beautiful than you know." Those words used to fill Ada like sunshine fills an empty cup. But that was a long time ago. Before the sickness came. Before everything changed. Before the day 7-year-old Ada stood at a graveside and watched her whole world go into the ground. Her father, a quiet man named Papa Emeka, was kind but weak. He loved Ada, but he could not survive alone. Within 2 years of Mama Rosa's death, he had brought home a new wife. Her name was Mrs. Vera. She came with a big smile, a loud voice, and a daughter named Sandra who was the same age as Ada. On the first day Mrs. Vera arrived, she hugged Ada and said, "I will be your new mama." Ada had believed her. She had smiled. She had felt hope again. But hope, for Ada, had a habit of leaving very quickly. Because from the very next morning, everything changed. The hug stopped. The kind words disappeared. And Ada, who had once been the daughter of the house, became something else entirely. Before we begin this emotional story, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, because the ending of Ada's story will leave you completely speechless. Mrs. Vera had two sides. In front of Papa Emeka, she was sweet and calm. She cooked for him, laughed at his jokes, and spoke about Ada with fake concern. "Oh, that poor child," she would say, touching her chest like she felt sorry. "I am doing my best for her." But the moment Papa Emeka left for work or traveled to the next town for business, Mrs. Vera became a completely different woman. Her eyes would go cold. Her voice would become sharp like a knife. And Ada would feel it immediately, like a change in the weather before a storm. Ada's daily life was a long list of never-ending work. She woke up at 4 in the morning to fetch water from the well, 2 trips with heavy buckets balanced carefully on her head. After that, she swept the entire compound, both the inside and outside. Then she washed all the clothes by hand, the family's clothes, including Sandra's many dresses and Mrs. Vera's large wrappers. Then she cooked breakfast. Then she went to the farm to tend to the crops. By the time she returned, it was time to cook lunch. By the time lunch was done, it was time to prepare for dinner. And somewhere in between all of this, she had to clean the house, fetch more water, and run errands to the market. She did all of this every single day. Without rest. Without praise. Without even a kind word. Sandra, on the other hand, lived like a princess. She woke up when she felt like it. She ate first, always the best portions. She wore new clothes every season. Mrs. Vera would sit beside her, comb her hair with oil, and tell her how beautiful she was. Sandra, you are the most fine girl in this village, Mrs. Vera would say, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. Every man will want you. Every family will beg for you. And Sandra would smile, look at Ada across the room, and say nothing. Sometimes she would say something. Sometimes she would look at Ada scrubbing the floor and say, make sure you clean it properly this time. You always do it wrong. And Mrs. Vera would laugh. The worst moments were when Mrs. Vera would insult Ada in front of visitors. If a neighbor came to visit and Ada served them water, Mrs. Vera would say loudly, don't mind how she looks. That is just how she is. We have tried. The visitors would look at Ada with pity or quiet disgust, and Ada would stand there, tray in her hands, and feel herself shrink. She used to cry at night, pressing her face into her thin blanket so nobody could hear. She used to pray that her father would notice. But Papa Emeka was always away, always tired, always believing whatever Mrs. Vera told him. And so Ada grew up, year after year, invisible in her own father's house, mocked in her own village, and slowly losing the memory of the little girl her mother once called beautiful. It was a Tuesday morning when the news arrived. Old Mr. Choku, the village announcer, walked through the main road with his bell, calling out in a voice that bounced off every wall and entered every home. People of this village, listen well. A great man is coming. A big businessman from the city. His name is Daniel Ose. He has chosen our village for a great project. He will work with our chief to bring new roads, clean water, and a health center to us. He rang his bell again and again. Prepare yourselves. He arrives in 3 days. The village exploded. You would think it was a festival. Women started cleaning their compounds immediately. Young girls ran to each other's houses to gossip and plan. Mothers began pulling out their children's best clothes, checking fabrics, looking for jewelry. The market women were already talking about what this Daniel looked like, how much money he had, whether he was married. By evening, someone who had traveled to the city before claimed they had seen Daniel once. He is tall, the man said, stretching his hand above his head to show. Very tall. And his face, like they carved it with care. Very fine man. And his car. You will faint when you see his car. That was enough. Every unmarried girl in the village went home that night with one thought in mind. Sandra was almost shaking with excitement. She came home and immediately started going through her clothes, throwing them on the bed, holding them up to the light. Mama, I need something new, she said. Something that will make me stand out. Mrs. Vera was equally excited. She clapped her hands and said, don't worry. We will go to the big market tomorrow. You must look like a queen when he arrives. If a man like that sees you, Sandra, it is finished. He will not look anywhere else. They laughed together, already planning the future as if it was a dress they were about to sew. Neither of them looked at Ada, who was quietly sweeping the corner of the room, listening to everything, feeling nothing because hope had long since stopped visiting her heart. Even the chief's daughter, a tall, confident young woman named Laura, began her own preparations. Laura was known across the village as the finest girl around. She walked with her chin high, wore expensive lace fabric, and believed deeply that she was in a different class from ordinary girls. When she heard about Daniel, she smiled to herself and said to her friends, a man like that and a woman like me, it only makes sense. Her friends agreed eagerly, not because they believed it was true, but because agreeing with Laura was always the safest thing to do. And so, 3 days before Daniel's arrival, the whole village was buzzing with excitement, competition, and quiet desperation, everyone wanting to be chosen, everyone believing they had a chance. Everyone except Ada. Daniel Ose arrived on a Friday morning. 2 black cars drove slowly down the main road, and the whole village gathered on both sides to watch. Children ran alongside the cars. Women stood with their best wrappers tied high. Young girls positioned themselves carefully, standing straight, smiling wide, hoping the windows would roll down and the man inside would see them. When the car finally stopped in front of the chief's compound and the door opened, there was a moment of complete silence. Daniel stepped out, and the silence made sense. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a quiet confidence that did not need noise. His face was calm and his eyes were sharp, the kind of eyes that saw things clearly without effort. He was wearing simple but expensive clothes, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed for attention. He greeted the chief with respect, shook hands with the elders, and spoke in a voice that was low and measured. He did not perform. He did not wave at the crowd or smile for anyone in particular. He was simply present, fully and quietly. And that calmness, strangely, made the girls more nervous, not less. The chief arranged a small welcome gathering that evening. Sandra wore a bright yellow dress and sat close to where Daniel was seated. Lara arrived in a wrapper so elegant that 3 women immediately asked who sewed it. Other girls circled the area like they were drawn by something magnetic. They laughed louder than usual, moved closer than was natural, and tried to catch Daniel's eyes. Daniel sat with the chief and 2 of his business partners, spoke about the project, asked intelligent questions, and ate quietly. A few girls managed to greet him directly. He was polite to all of them. But polite in the way a wall is solid, present, firm, and impossible to enter. He did not linger. He did not flirt. He simply nodded, thanked them, and returned to his conversation. That night, Mrs. Vera came home frustrated. He did not even look at Sandra properly, she hissed to herself. Sandra sat quietly, her excitement now replaced with confusion. He is strange, Sandra said. Most men would have noticed me. Mrs. Vera straightened up. He noticed. He is just careful. We still have time. But across the room, in her small corner near the kitchen, Ada was already asleep on her mat, exhausted from the day's work, completely unaware that in 3 days, this man who had ignored the whole village would walk up to her in the market and say her name. Saturday was market day. Ada carried a tray loaded with peppers, onions, and tomatoes to the market for Mrs. Vera, who had made it clear that every single item must be sold before Ada could return home. Ada set up her small space on the ground, arranged the vegetables neatly, and began calling out to buyers in a quiet, steady voice. She was not beautiful by the village's standards that morning. Her hair was wrapped in an old cloth. Her dress was plain and slightly faded. She had no jewelry, no makeup, no extra effort. She was simply Ada, doing what she always did, surviving 1 hour at a time. The market was more crowded than usual because many people had come out hoping to catch a glimpse of Daniel, who someone had said might pass through the area during his survey of the village. And sure enough, around midday, Daniel appeared at the entrance of the market with 2 members of his team. The market shifted immediately. Sellers started calling out louder. Women adjusted their clothes. Girls from the night before positioned themselves again, smiling and waving. It was almost like watching people perform in a play, everyone playing their best version of themselves for one audience member. Daniel walked through calmly, nodding occasionally, speaking with his team. Then something made him stop. Near the back of the market, an elderly woman had stumbled and dropped her basket. Yams rolled across the ground, oranges bounced into the mud, and the woman stood there looking confused and embarrassed, her hands shaking. Most people around her barely glanced before continuing their business. A few young men nearby laughed. But Ada, who was 3 stalls away, immediately left her tray, ran to the woman, and began picking up the scattered items without being asked. She helped the woman stand, checked if she was hurt, wiped the dirty yams with the edge of her own cloth, and placed everything carefully back into the basket. Then she bought 2 of the woman's oranges even though she could barely afford it, just so the woman would feel that something good had come from the fall. The old woman held Ada's hands and blessed her. Ada smiled and returned to her tray. Daniel had seen everything. He stood still for a moment, watching. Then he turned to one of his team members and said quietly, "Who is that?" His team member shrugged. Daniel began walking in Ada's direction. When he reached her, he crouched down to her level, which was unusual for a man of his status, and said simply, "That was kind of you." Ada looked up, startled. She did not recognize him immediately. When she did, her eyes went wide. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, she needed help. Daniel nodded slowly. "What is your name?" "Ada," she said quietly. He extended his hand. "I am Daniel." Ada looked at his hand for a second, then shook it carefully, like she was afraid it might disappear. "I know," she said. And for the first time in many years, someone important had looked at Ada, really looked at her, and seen something worth seeing. If you are already feeling bad for Ada and you believe kindness is more beautiful than appearance, then subscribe to the channel right now and leave a comment below saying, "True beauty comes from the heart." The village noticed. It took less than 1 day for word to spread that Daniel had spoken to Ada at the market. By Sunday morning, it was all anyone could talk about. The women at the water point whispered. The young men at the roadside shook their heads in disbelief. Sandra came home from her friend's house with a tight face and went straight to Mrs. Vera. "They are saying Daniel spoke to Ada yesterday at the market," she said. Mrs. Vera laughed at first. A short, sharp laugh. "Spoke to her? Maybe he asked her the price of pepper." Sandra did not laugh. "Mama, they say he stayed and talked to her for a long time. And he came back to the market again today and talked to her again." The laughter stopped. Mrs. Vera's face changed into something harder. Over the next few days, Daniel did come back. Not every day, but enough. He would find a reason to pass by where Ada was. Sometimes it was the market. Once it was near the well where she fetched water. He would greet her, ask her something simple, and they would talk for a few minutes. Ada was always surprised each time. She kept waiting for the moment when he would realize his mistake, when he would look at her properly and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were someone else." But that moment never came. Instead, he kept coming back. And slowly, Ada began to speak more freely. She began to tell him small things about her day. He would listen with full attention, not checking his phone, not looking around, just listening. It felt strange to Ada, being listened to. It felt like putting on a warm coat after years in the cold. But outside their small conversations, the storm was building. Lara, the chief's daughter, called a meeting with 3 of her closest friends. "This is embarrassing," she said, her voice cold. "That girl, that market girl, is getting attention that belongs to someone worthy. We need to do something." Sandra and Mrs. Vera were already spreading rumors. They told neighbors that Ada was a troublemaker, that she had a bad history, that she had once stolen from a family in the village. None of it was true. All of it was said with confidence and repetition until some people began to wonder. Someone told Daniel's team member that Ada was not a good girl. The team member mentioned it casually to Daniel. Daniel said nothing in response. But the next time he saw Ada, he asked her directly, in his calm, straightforward way, "Some people are saying things about you. I want to hear your side." Ada looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I have nothing to hide. Ask anyone who has received help from me. Ask the old woman from the market. That was all she said. And somehow, that was enough for Daniel. It happened on a quiet evening near the edge of the village. Daniel had asked Ada to walk with him while he observed the area near the river, one of the sites for the water project. Ada had agreed nervously, wearing her cleanest dress, which was still simple and plain. They walked slowly, and Daniel asked her questions about the village, about the people, about what they needed most. Ada answered honestly, sharing things she had noticed over years of moving through the village quietly. She told him which families fetched water the farthest, which elderly people had no one to help them, which parts of the road became impossible in the rainy season. Daniel listened and took quiet notes. Then at some point, he put the notebook away and said, Tell me about yourself, Ada. Not the village. You. Ada was quiet for a long time. Then she began to talk. Slowly at first, like a door that had been locked for too long and needed gentle pushing. She told him about her mother. She described Mama Rosa's voice, her hands, the way she used to sing while braiding hair. She spoke about the morning her father came to her school to take her home, and how she had known from his face before he even said a word. She talked about Mrs. Vera, about Sandra, about waking up before the sun every day for years. She did not cry as she spoke. Her voice was steady, but her eyes told the real story. Daniel watched her eyes. He did not interrupt. He did not say, I'm sorry, too quickly, the way people do when they want you to stop talking. He let her finish. Every word. Every memory. Every quiet pain. When she finally stopped, there was a long silence between them. Then Daniel said, You are stronger than you know, Ada. Ada shook her head slowly. I am not strong. I am just too tired to fall apart. Daniel looked at her with something in his eyes that she could not name yet. That is exactly what strength is, he said softly. They stood there by the river for a few more minutes, watching the water move, saying nothing. And in that silence, something shifted between them. Something quiet and real, the way roots grow underground where nobody can see. Ada walked home that evening with something unfamiliar sitting in her chest. She could not name it right away. It was not happiness exactly. It was something more careful than that. It was the small, frightened feeling of hope returning after a very long absence. She pressed her hand against her chest as she walked, almost as if she was afraid it would leave again if she moved too quickly. And across the village, without knowing it, 3 women, Mrs. Vera, Sandra, and Laura, were each lying in their beds, unable to sleep, angry for reasons they could not fully explain, because somewhere in their hearts they had already begun to feel what they refused to believe, that Ada, the girl they had mocked and discarded, was about to take the one thing they all wanted. 2 days before Daniel was scheduled to leave for the city, Mrs. Vera made her move. She went directly to the village chief's compound and requested to speak with the chief's wife, a powerful and respected woman whom everyone listened to. Mrs. Vera arrived with a composed face and a prepared story. She said Ada had been behaving shamefully, chasing after Daniel in a way that was embarrassing to the family, that Ada had a history of lies and manipulation, and that a man of Daniel's status deserved better information about who was pursuing him. The chief's wife listened carefully, then sent word to Daniel through a messenger. Daniel received the message and read it. Then he folded it calmly, placed it on the table, and called Ada. When Ada arrived, Daniel was sitting with his 2 business partners and the chief's eldest son. Ada's heart dropped when she saw the gathering. She thought something terrible had happened. Daniel gestured for her to sit. Then he said, quietly but clearly, I have been told many things about you in the past few days. I want you to know that I have heard all of it. And I want you to know that I have also watched you. Every morning when you pass the road near the chief's compound. The way you greeted the old blind man sitting by the fence. The way you gave half of your bread to the child who was crying near the market. The way you said nothing when Sandra insulted you in front of your neighbors 2 days ago. Ada's eyes widened. She had not known he was watching. Daniel looked at her steadily. I do not judge people by what angry mouths say about them. I judge people by what I see with my own eyes. He paused. And what I have seen is a woman I respect. Ada could not speak. For a moment, she could not even breathe. That evening, Sandra and Mrs. Vera heard that Daniel had dismissed the complaint. Mrs. Vera was furious. Sandra cried in her room. Lara, the chief's daughter, went silent in a way that was worse than shouting. The village gossip turned wild. Some people defended Ada for the first time, others doubled down on their mockery, saying she had tricked the man somehow. The village crackled with tension like dry grass before fire. And through all of it, Ada went home, sat on her mat, looked up at the ceiling, and said one word to the darkness above her. Mama. As if her mother could hear her across whatever distance separated the living from the gone. As if Mama Rosa, somewhere, was already smiling. The chief organized a farewell gathering. It was a large event held in the open ground near the chief's compound, under tall trees with lanterns hung between branches. Almost every family in the village came. Women brought food and drinks. Children played between the legs of adults. The village council sat in a row of carved wooden chairs, and the chief himself sat at the center in his full regalia. Daniel and his team sat as honored guests. The evening was warm and full of laughter, music, and color. But underneath the celebration, everyone was waiting. Somehow, through the whispers that travel faster than wind in a small village, everyone had heard that Daniel might say something important tonight. Something about a woman. The girls who had been competing for weeks straightened their backs and checked their appearances one more time. Sandra wore a new dress Mrs. Vera had bought for exactly this moment. Lara sat close to the front, composed and confident as ever, certain that the moment she had been preparing for was finally here. Ada sat near the back of the gathering, not because she was hiding, but because she did not think this night had anything to do with her. She had come only because one of the older women in the village who had always been kind to her had asked her to help serve food. Ada was holding a tray. After the speeches and the singing, the chief stood and invited Daniel to say a few words. Daniel stood slowly. He thanked the chief. He thanked the village elders. He spoke briefly about the project and what it would bring. Then he paused. The gathering went very quiet. Even the children seemed to sense something important was about to happen. Before I leave tomorrow, Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly across the compound, I want to say something that is not about business. He looked around the gathering slowly. I came to this village for work. But I found something I was not looking for. He stepped down from the small platform he was standing on and began walking through the crowd. People turned to watch. Sandra sat up straighter. Lara held her breath. Mrs. Vera quietly moved Sandra forward slightly, as if adjusting her position in a game. Daniel walked past the front row. Past Sandra. Past Lara. Past the chief section. He kept walking until he reached the back of the gathering. Until he was standing in front of Ada, who was holding a tray of food and looking at him with wide, stunned eyes. The tray almost slipped from her hands. Daniel took the tray gently from her and handed it to the woman standing next to her. Then he turned back to Ada and spoke in a voice that the whole gathering could hear. This woman, he said, did not try to impress me. She did not dress for me or perform for me. She did not fight to be seen. But she is the only person in this village who showed me what real goodness looks like. Not in words. In action. Every single day. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small box. The gathering made a sound. A collective breath, half gasp, half whisper. Ada, Daniel said, opening the box slowly, I am not asking you to marry me because you are perfect. I am asking you because you are real. And I have never met anyone more real than you. Inside the box was a ring. Simple. Elegant. Glowing softly in the lantern light. Ada stared at the ring. Then she looked at Daniel's face. Then, for the first time in longer than she could remember, tears came down her face. Not tears of pain. Not tears of shame. Something else entirely. Something warm. Daniel looked at her gently. Yes or no, Ada? It is your choice. Ada wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked around her once, at the frozen faces of the village, at Sandra's open mouth, at Mrs. Vera's stern expression, at Laura sitting like a statue in the front row. She looked at all of them. Then she looked back at Daniel and said in a quiet, steady voice, yes. The compound erupted. 3 months later, Ada returned to the village. She came in a black car that parked slowly at the main road. When the door opened, the people who had gathered to watch thought they were seeing someone else. The woman who stepped out was wearing a soft blue dress, fitted and elegant. Her hair was arranged neatly on her head. Her skin was clear and glowing. She stood straight, not with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who finally knew their own value. Behind her, Daniel stepped out and placed his hand gently on her back. The village was silent. Mrs. Vera stood at her doorstep and could not move. Sandra stood beside her, holding a wrapper to her chest, her new dress suddenly feeling meaningless. Lara watched from a distance, her chin, for the first time, not quite as high as usual. Old Mr. Choku, the village announcer, took off his cap and held it to his chest like he was watching something sacred. The old woman from the market, the one Ada had helped that day, pushed through the small crowd and took Ada's hands in hers. God answered, the old woman said, her voice thick. Ada held her hands and smiled. The kind of smile that does not need to say anything, because it says everything. Ada did not shout at Mrs. Vera. She did not embarrass Sandra in front of everyone the way they had done to her for years. When Mrs. Vera came forward with a shaking voice and said, Ada, please, forgive, Ada simply looked at her and said, I forgave you a long time ago. Not for you. For me. Then she turned and walked forward. She and Daniel had already started planning the small business she would run. A shop in the village, stocked with goods the women needed, managed by Ada herself. It was her idea. Daniel had offered her something bigger, but Ada had said, start where the people are. And that had made Daniel love her even more. That evening, as the sun went down and painted the sky orange and pink, Ada sat on the veranda of the chief's guest house where they were staying. She looked out at the village, at the road she had walked barefoot for years, at the well where she had carried water since childhood, at the trees she had passed every morning with heavy buckets and a heavier heart. She looked at all of it. And she did not feel anger. She did not feel bitterness. She felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. She felt peace. Because the girl they had called ugly had turned out to be the one worth choosing. The girl they had pushed to the back had ended up at the front. And all the mocking, all the shame, all the years of pain, had not broken her. They had only made her roots grow deeper, so that when the sun finally came, she could rise higher than anyone had expected. Somewhere above the orange sky, Mama Rosa was smiling. Thank you so much for watching Ada's emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Remember, people may judge your appearance, but your true value will always shine at the right time.